Okay, let's think about something fundamental, really. When you look out at the world, at the people you meet, what's your first instinct?
Yeah, what's that gut feeling?
Exactly. Do you generally assume people are basically decent,
Hmm.
that they've got the potential to do good?
Or are you maybe a bit more cautious, thinking, well, people mostly look out for number one?
Right. That
Oh.
tension. So our mission here really is simple. We've gone through a lot of material on this,
A lot of material.
and we've tried to pull out the absolute key insights about faith in humanity. Think of it as your express lane to understanding this stuff.
Saves you the homework.
Exactly. So, all right, let's jump in. When we say faith in humanity, what are we actually talking about? It's not like religious faith, right?
That's a crucial distinction. Yeah. While faith often makes us think religion, in this context, it's really secular. It's a kind of trust
Trust in people.
in people, in fellow humans. It's this belief, this sort of confidence in the basic goodness, the moral potential, the capacity for good that exists in people generally, or even in individuals.
So it's kind of a choice to believe in that decency, even if you don't always see proof.
That's a great way to put it. It is a choice.
Yeah.
A choice to lean towards that positive view.
And it means looking to us humans,
Yeah.
for our values, like kindness, empathy, that sort of thing.
Precisely. It's about finding those values in our shared experience, using reason, talking it through, not necessarily relying on divine rules.
Okay.
And it's tied to believing in the inherent worth of people, Even when, well, let's face it, we see plenty of examples of people messing up.
Constantly. So there's definitely a risk involved in having this kind of faith then. You're setting yourself up for disappointment sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. That's fundamental. Faith in humanity, like any trust, means making yourself vulnerable. You're opening the door to maybe being let down.
Right.
Because trust itself, the psychological bedrock here, is basically being willing to accept that vulnerability. You have positive expectations about how someone will act, their intentions.
You hope they'll do the right thing, follow the rules.
Yeah, while knowing deep down that betrayal is always a possibility.
Okay, so the AI angle. How does thinking about AI help us unpack something so human?
Right. This is where it gets pretty cool, I think. We're using AI ideas as an analytical tool.
Like a metaphor.
Exactly, like metaphors or models. Think about how AI deals with uncertainty, how it processes the information to learn, the algorithms it uses, even the ethical frameworks we're trying to develop for it.
Okay.
We can use those concepts to shed light on the structure, the mechanics, the different shades, and the consequences of this human faith.
So the AI lens helps us see our faith as what? Like a calculation?
Sort of, like a constantly updating probability, maybe. A way our brains handle social risk and complexity without getting totally overwhelmed.
But we're not saying people are robots.
Absolutely not. No, it's just a useful way to dissect the mechanisms underneath trust and belief. A fresh angle.
Got it. So this faith in humanity, it's not just one simple thing then. You mentioned layers.
Oh, definitely not simple. It's a really complex blend. You've got philosophy in there, psychology, sociology. It's all mixed together.
And the AI lens helps see how they all connect, like a system.
Exactly, like a dynamic system where all these parts influence each other.
Okay, let's start with the philosophy bit. Where do the core ideas come from?
Well, a big one is humanism. Humanism really puts the focus on us, on human agency, our ability to reason, the shared values that we figure out together.
Right, finding meaning and morals in human relationships, not necessarily from outside.
Precisely. And that lines up really well with faith in humanity, doesn't it? Looking to each other, valuing things like compassion because they matter to us in our shared lives.
So philosophically, it's rooted in the idea that we can build a decent society based on our own capabilities. Reason, empathy.
That's a key takeaway, yeah. We don't necessarily need external rules imposed from above.
Sure. What else?
Then there's virtue ethics. This perspective often sees faith in humanity itself as a kind of secular moral virtue.
Like it's admirable just to have that faith.
Kind of, yeah. Because it helps build positive connections, stronger communities. It's about holding on to that belief in people's basic decency, even when it's tough.
Can you give an example of that? Like in practice?
Sure. Think about nonviolent resistance movements. Often, the people involved have this deep-seated belief in the potential for goodness, even in their oppressors, right?
Yeah.
Their aim isn't just, say, policy change, but maybe changing hearts and minds, building something better long-term. That takes a certain faith.
That makes sense. Believing change is possible even against the odds.
Exactly. And some philosophers even talk about secular attitudes that feel a bit like religious reverence. Things that help us flourish, find purpose just within the human sphere, no God required.
Okay.
Ultimately, this faith is what makes real community possible. It lets us navigate that tension between, looking out for ourselves and recognizing that everyone else matters too.
So having this faith actually helps us treat people better, more fairly.
It really does. It helps steer us away from being unjust, and it pulls us into relationships that have real moral weight.
Okay, that covers the philosophical roots. Let's shift gears. What about the psychology? What's going on in our heads?
You mentioned trust earlier, and you were spot on. That's the absolute psychological bedrock.
Right.
Trust psychologically is that belief, that confidence in someone else's reliability, their honesty, their basic goodwill.
Expecting them to act predictably, maybe? Follow through.
Yes, but it's more than just prediction. It specifically involves a positive expectation about their character, their intentions. It's like your brain making these little bets constantly.
And always with that element of risk we talked about.
Always. Accepting vulnerability, hoping for a good outcome based on someone else's actions. But here's something else. What really sets faith apart from just simple trust is resilience.
Resilience. How so?
Faith, whether we're talking secular or religious, usually involves this tendency to kind of stick with it, to maintain that reliance even when doubts arise or when you see negative stuff that could shake your confidence.
It's not just giving up at the first sign of trouble.
Pretty much. It's not about being totally irrational, but it reflects a deeper commitment, maybe, a way of seeing things that helps us ride out the bumps in the road.
And this ability to trust, to have faith.
Yeah.
It actually affects our well-being.
Oh, massively. Research consistently shows that people with a higher general tendency to trust others' generalized trust report being happier, having higher subjective well-being.
Why is that?
Well, faith can be a really powerful coping mechanism. It can give life meaning, purpose, especially when things get tough. It boosts resilience by encouraging positive problem solving, and it fosters that sense of community, that emotional support network.
It sounds like it's baked in pretty early, too.
It often is.
Yeah.
Eric Erickson's developmental stages, that idea of basic trust versus mistrust forming in infancy based on caregiver relationships, that's a foundation.
Right. And when we decide whether to trust someone, what are we looking for?
Good question. Research points to a few key things. Their competence, like can they actually do what they say? Their benevolence, do they seem to have good intentions towards us? And their integrity, are they principled, honest?
And other things matter too, I guess, like reputation.
Definitely. Reputation, how close we feel to them, all that feeds into the trust calculation.
Okay, philosophy, psychology. What about the bigger picture? Society.
Yeah.
How does faith in humanity work on that level?
Sociologically, trust isn't just in our heads. It's seen as a social construct. It's a property of groups, of relationships.
So it exists between people.
Exactly. Some sociologists go so far as to say it's the absolute bedrock of society itself. Without some level of mutual trust or faithfulness, you just have chaos, fear. It's maybe even more basic than shared morals for holding things together.
Wow. So it's like the invisible scaffolding.
That's a great analogy, and it serves a critical function, reducing complexity. Think about it. The world is incredibly complex, uncertain. We can't possibly analyze every single interaction from scratch.
No way.
So trust acts as a shortcut, a cognitive heuristic, they call it. It lets us make decisions, take action, even with incomplete information, by assuming some baseline level of goodwill or predictability in others.
Especially now when we deal with so many strangers all the time.
Precisely. That's crucial for modern society. Trust allows cooperation way beyond just our family or close friends. It's what makes markets work, organizations function, large-scale systems possible.
You mentioned different kinds of trust earlier.
Right. There's particularized trust, the trust we have in specific people we know well, like family and friends.
Okay.
And then there's generalized trust. That's the broader kind, the trust we extend or don't extend to people we don't know personally, strangers, people in general. Faith in humanity really aligns with this generalized trust.
And there are others, like trusting your own group more.
Yep. Things like in-group versus out-group trust, trust in neighbors. And social norms play a huge role here. Sometimes just the expectation that you should trust someone is enough to make you do it, even if you're unsure. It's like a social signal.
And when that trust works out, it builds on itself.
Exactly. When trust is reciprocated, reinforced, it creates what sociologists call communities of trust. And those communities tend to thrive socially, intellectually, psychologically.
Okay, let's bring the AI lens back in. How does it help us tie all these philosophical, psychological, sociological threads together?
Well, one way is to model this faith, this trust, as a kind of subjective probability.
Okay, like assigning odds.
Sort of. Imagine you have an internal score, let's call it P, decency, the probability you assign to the idea that people generally are reasonably decent or cooperative.
Right, your starting point.
Exactly. Influenced by your background, culture, philosophy, and then, like an AI learning system, you update that score based on new information.
Your experiences, things you observe.
Precisely. You see someone do something kind, your P decency might nudge up. See something awful, it might nudge down. It's analogous to Bayesian inference and AI updating beliefs based on evidence.
So we're constantly tweaking our internal faithometer.
Huh. In a way, yes. And the decision to trust in a specific situation becomes like a risk assessment. You weigh the potential good outcome against the potential bad outcome if trust is broken.
Factoring in your general P-decent score, plus anything you know about this person.
You got it. A simple rule might be, trust if the potential reward times the probability of them being trustworthy is greater than the potential cost times the probability of them not being trustworthy.
That makes trust sound like a mental shortcut again.
It absolutely is. Instead of impossible calculations for every interaction, our general faith level sets a baseline, simplifying things. It lets us navigate social complexity efficiently.
And AI systems face similar problems.
They do. Especially social AI, they need ways to judge reliability, maybe using past interactions, reputation scores, which are like social trust, maybe even built-in assumptions about cooperation levels.
What about that resilience factor, though, the stickiness of faith? How does that fit the AI model? That doesn't sound like just updating probabilities based on evidence.
Excellent point. That resilience suggests it's not purely evidence-driven. There's a volitional element, maybe, something that makes us resist chucking our faith out the window after one bad experience.
Right.
This stickiness might be tied to our core values or how important faith is for our own well-being. Or maybe it's a long-term strategy. Believing in cooperation helps make cooperation happen more often.
So how would you model that stickiness in AI terms?
Well, you could make it harder for negative evidence to drastically lower the P-decency score, or you could frame faith itself as a kind of chosen long-term strategy valued for its overall benefits in promoting cooperation, not just for short-term predictive accuracy.
So it's clear it's not black and white. There's this whole spectrum of belief when it comes to faith in humanity.
Absolutely. A huge range. You've got everything from, active goodwill, philanthropy at one end,
To the complete opposite.
all the way down to deep cynicism, even misanthropy or real dislike or distrust of humankind at the other.
And what puts someone somewhere on that spectrum?
It's a mix of things. Their basic assumptions about human nature are huge, then personal experiences, the culture they're in, even just cognitive habits.
Let's dig into those assumptions about human nature first. That feels pretty fundamental. Are people basically good or basically bad?
That's the ancient question, isn't it? And it's right at the heart of this spectrum. Your answer really shapes your outlook.
So who argues for innate goodness?
Well, you have ancient philosophers like Mencius in China. He talked about these innate sprouts or beginnings of goodness, compassion, shame, respect, knowing right from wrong. Nurture them, he said, and virtue follows naturally.
Okay.
Rousseau, much later, argued that humans in a state of nature were inherently good, peaceful, and it was society that messed us up.
Right, the noble savage idea.
Kind of. Even Adam Smith, famous for economics, wrote about our innate sympathy, our empathy, as being vital for society. And in psychology, humanistic thinkers like Carl Rogers emphasized a natural drive towards positive growth and connection.
So those views tend to support having more faith in people.
Generally, yes. They provide a foundation for optimism.
What about the other side? The idea that we're inherently not so good.
Well, Zunzi, who was actually responding to Mencius, argued the opposite. He said human nature leans towards self-interest, and goodness requires conscious effort, learning, discipline. Our natural urges, left alone, lead to conflict.
Interesting contrast.
And then you have Hobbes in the West. He didn't necessarily say evil, but argued we're fundamentally self-interested, driven by competition, fear, desire for glory. Without a strong ruler, life would be nasty, brutish, and short.
A war of all against all.
Exactly. These views tend to make generalized faith in humanity seem, well, naive, perhaps.
But how do those views explain, real acts of altruism?
Oh.
People sacrificing for strangers.
That's the ongoing debate, isn't it? Perhaps those actions are seen as exceptions or maybe sophisticated forms of self-interest or the result of intense social conditioning overcoming nature. It's complex.
And these beliefs we hold, they can actually influence reality.
Very possibly. Like Carl Rogers suggested, they can become self-fulfilling. If you approach people assuming the worst.
You might provoke the worst.
Exactly. Whereas approaching with trust might encourage cooperation. It's a feedback loop.
So it's not just about innate nature. What other things push us towards faith or disbelief?
Oh, loads of things. Personal experience is huge, obviously. Good experiences reinforce faith. Bad ones, like betrayal or seeing cruelty, can really erode it.
Makes sense.
Cultural factors matter too. The norms, values, even the institutions in your society. They shape expectations about how trustworthy people generally are.
Okay.
Then there are cognitive biases, like confirmation bias. We tend to notice things that confirm what we already think. Or the availability heuristic, a vivid bad experience might make us think bad things are more common than they are.
Right.
Simple cynicism plays a role, just a general default distrust of motives. And our own psychology personality traits like agreeableness tend to correlate with trust. Plus, some people just seem to have a higher baseline disposition to trust.
Let's go to that far end of the spectrum you mentioned, misanthropy. What exactly is that?
Misanthropy, yeah. Basically, it's a general hatred, dislike, contempt, or deep distrust of humankind, of human nature, human behavior.
It's based on seeing humanity as fundamentally flawed.
Yes. It's a really negative evaluation, and it's important to distinguish it from, say, misogyny, dislike of women, or the dislike of men. Misanthropy is aimed at the whole species.
And it's the opposite of philanthropy.
Pretty much. Philanthropy means love of humankind, implying goodwill. Though, today philanthropist often just means a rich donor, which isn't quite the same deep meaning.
So what kind of flaws do misanthropes focus on?
A whole range. Morally, cruelty, selfishness, greed, injustice, hypocrisy, indifference to suffering. They see these everywhere.
Big scale stuff too, like wars.
Oh yeah. Wars, environmental destruction, systemic inequality, these are often cited as evidence. Intellectually, they might point to perceived irrationality, dogma, self-deception, even aesthetically finding humanity or its creations ugly. Spiritually, a lack of meaning or purpose.
Wow. Is all misanthropy the same, though, or are there different flavors?
Definitely different flavors. It can be very emotional hatred, disgust, or more intellectual, a philosophical judgment.
Right.
Some condemn everyone, maybe even themselves. Others might make exceptions for a select few they see as okay. Some target inherent human nature. Others focus more on corrupting social systems.
And how does it show up? Do misanthropes just hide away?
Some might withdraw, yeah, but others might become activists, trying to critique or even fix humanity's flaws. Others might just be resigned, maybe use humor to cope with perceived absurdity. It varies a lot.
What makes someone become misanthropic?
Often it stems from disillusionment. Maybe they started out idealistic and got burned by negative experiences, witnessing terrible things, living under oppression or extreme inequality. Sometimes it comes from feeling superior, too.
Okay, this raises a big question for me and probably for you listening. What are the actual consequences for someone? How does being more trusting or more misanthropic actually affect your life?
That's the bottom line, isn't it? Let's look at happiness, well-being. The evidence is pretty strong here.
More trust equals more happiness.
Generally, yes. Faith in humanity, or at least generalized trust, is consistently linked to higher subjective well-being, more life satisfaction. Trust helps build positive social connections, buffers stress, gives a sense of belonging, all vital for mental health.
And the flip side, misanthropy.
Often linked to negative outcomes. Suspicion, conflict, social isolation, those tend to correlate with lower well-being, more unhappiness.
What about morality? Is having faith good and misanthropy bad?
It's a bit more nuanced, but generally, yeah. Faith is often seen as a moral virtue. It motivates helping others, fairness, building community.
And misanthropy.
Especially the hateful kind is usually viewed negatively. But some misanthropic critiques come from very high moral standards. Sometimes that anger can fuel ethical action against injustice. And remember, being too trusting can make you vulnerable to exploitation, so it's not 100% simple.
Okay, what about being strong or weak?
Yeah.
Or smart or not?
Strength. Well, faith fosters resilience, connection, cooperation. Those look like strengths. Chronic distrust and isolation often look like weaknesses in navigating the social world. Intelligence. Doesn't seem to be a direct link either way. You find smart and not so smart people all along the spectrum.
And things like wealth or health. Is there a connection there?
It's complex, lots of feedback loops. Societies with higher trust tend to have better economic performance, which might indirectly affect individual wealth
Makes sense.
and health. Strong social ties built on trust are really good for both mental and physical health. They buffer stress. Isolation and conflict linked to distrust are detrimental. But also, things like poverty or chronic illness, inequality, those can erode trust and push people towards cynicism or misanthropy. It works both ways.
How does the AI lens help us understand these individual impacts?
Well, think about agent-based modeling ABMs. These are computer simulations.
Right, you mentioned those.
You can create virtual societies with agents programmed with different trust levels, different strategies for interacting. Then you run the simulation and see what happens under different conditions. Resource scarcity, inequality, different rules.
And you can see how trust or distrust spreads, how those self-fulfilling prophecies play out.
Exactly. It helps explore those dynamics. We can also use big data analysis, like AI does, to look for statistical correlations, correlating people's trust attitudes with their demographics, socioeconomic status, health outcomes, personality traits, finding patterns on a large scale.
So wrapping this up, it's definitely not a simple case of people being good or bad. There are just so many layers to this whole faith in humanity idea.
Absolutely, and exploring it through these different lenses, philosophy, psychology, sociology. And yeah, even that AI metaphor gives us a much richer, more nuanced understanding of something so fundamental to being human.
We've really covered a lot of ground here, defining faith in humanity, looking at its roots, the spectrum from philanthropy to misanthropy, and how it impacts us.
We have. And hopefully using that AI perspective as a thinking tool has offered a fresh way to consider these enduring questions about ourselves and how we relate to each other. It shows how even something seemingly abstract like faith has underlying dynamics we can analyze.
So as we navigate, an increasingly complicated world, really understanding this balanced trust, skepticism, vulnerability, it feels more critical than ever.
It really does. We need to be aware of what shapes our own views and the ripple effects those views have.
It's not about, being naive or blindly trusting.
Not at all. It's about understanding what builds trust, what breaks it, and why fostering conditions where cooperation makes sense is so important. It's an ongoing task, always adapting, especially figuring out how to rebuild trust when it is broken.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to maybe chew on. As we interact more and more with artificial intelligence, how might our basic beliefs about human nature, our own faith in humanity, shape how we design these systems? And maybe even, how might interacting with AI start to shape our view of ourselves?
That's a deep one to ponder.
Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
This is DigitView.